Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Terumot. We are up to Perek Daled Mishna Aleph. Today's Mishnah should be Leilun Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbaev and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israel of Menuchatam Began Eden. Amen. Today's Mishnah is going to deal with a case where someone does not separate the full amount of Terumah or Maaser at one time, but first separates only some of it, intending to separate the rest later. The separated portion removes the tevel status of part of the pile, but the other part remains tevel as before. For example, a person intends to separate 2 se'ah of terumah from a pile of 100 se'ah, which is 1/50th of the total. But he first separated only 1 se'ah. So half of the remaining 99 se'ah is no longer tevel, in that its terumah has been removed, but the other half is still tevel, and the same halacha would apply when one separates only some of the 10th that is required for maaser. Now, it comes out that the pile is a mixture of tevel and non-tevel. We learned before in chapter 1, Mishnah 5, that terumah and maaser cannot be separated from non-tevel. Therefore, the portion of terumah that he removes later is not valid unless we assume that it comes from the tevel part of that pile. The Mishnah says, "Hamafrish miktzat terumah u'maasrot." If someone separates some of the required terumah and maaser from a pile, so the pile is now part non-tevel and part tevel, motzi mimenu terumah alav, he can remove the rest of the terumah or maaser needed for that pile from the pile itself, because you can assume that the new portion is being taken from the tevel part of the pile. But he cannot remove terumah or maaser from the remainder of that pile for somewhere else, meaning for a different pile of tevel, because in this case we are concerned that maybe the portion is from the non-tevel part of the first pile. The Mefarshim explain logic. Why is it allowed to remove the rest of the terumah or maaser needed from that pile, from the pile itself? Because logic tells us that removing terumah or maaser in stages is allowed. Why? Because there are situations where this is the only way to remove terumah. For example, where the amount of terumah is too large or heavy to be lifted all at once. So the Chachamim allowed it. However, to remove terumah or maaser from the remainder of that pile for a different pile of tevel, that's not allowed, because since it's possible to remove the terumah or maaser for the second pile from that very pile itself, which is entirely tevel, the Chachamim saw no reason to rule leniently and let it be taken from the first pile, which is tevel only in part. The Mishnah brings down the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, "Af motziu lemakom acher terumot u'maasrot, terumah u'maasrot." He can even remove terumah or maaser from the pile for somewhere else, meaning in this case too, the new portion can be viewed as coming from the tevel part of that pile. And the Mefarshim explain, Rabbi Meir holds that since it is permitted to remove terumah or maaser from a pile that is partly non-tevel, it makes no difference whether one is removing it for that pile or for another pile. And the Rav tells us, "Ven halacha ki Rabbi Meir," the halacha does not follow Rabbi Meir. That is in Rabotai Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Bet, now just to give you an introduction, brought down in the article elucidated to understand this Mishnah, there's a lot of background to it. The Mishnah, in Mishnah Bet, is going to discuss a case where a person gives a se'ah of his produce to a Levi and another se'ah to a poor person, but he does not intend these portions to be Maaser Rishon and Maaser Ani right away, because he has not yet decided which 8 se'ah of his tevel he is separating them for. He intends that when he does choose the 8 se'ah of tevel, the se'ah he gave to the Levi will then become Maaser Rishon, and the se'ah he gave to the poor person will become Maaser Ani. And then Mefarshim explain, the owner already separated terumah for the produce in his storehouse. He now wants to separate Maaser Rishon and Maaser Ani for just 10 se'ah of the remaining produce, but he does not want to choose those 10 se'ah at this time. So he gives 1 se'ah to a Levi and another se'ah to a poor person, intending to choose the other 8 se'ah later. Now Mefarshim explain, if you look at the Rambam's commentary, to be exact, he only has to give 0.9 se'ah as Maaser Ani, since Maaser Ani is 1/10 of what remains after Maaser Rishon is separated. In this case, it's 9 se'ah. Those Maaserot will suffice to remove the tevel status of 8.1 se'ah of his produce. Now, in order for this to work, the 2 se'ah he gave away have to still exist when he chooses the tevel, since that is when their designation as Maaser Rishon and Maaser Ani is supposed to take effect. If they no longer exist, the 8 se'ah that he selects will remain tevel and may not be in until Maaser Rishon and Maaser Ani are separated again. The Mishnah is going to cite a machloket as to whether it can be assumed that the 2 se'ah do in fact still exist when he selects the other se'ah, 8 se'ah. The Mishnah says, "Misha yu perotav b'migura." someone whose tevel produce was in the storeroom, v'natan se'ah leven levi u'se'ah le'ani, and he gave a se'ah of it to a Levi and a se'ah of it to a poor person for the sake of 8 se'ah of produce that he will select later. But in the meantime, the Levi and the poor person went away, and we don't know what became of the portions they got. Mafrish ad shmone sin v'ochlan. The halacha is, he may separate up to 8 se'ah from the produce in the storeroom and eat them. Why? Because it can be assumed that the 2 se'ah he gave away still exist. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. V'chachamim omrim, but the sages say, eno mafrish ela lefi cheshbon. He may separate and eat produce from the storeroom only in proportion to the amount of gifts that are known to still exist. For example, the Mefarshim say, if only half of the Maaser Rishon and half of the Maaser Ani are known to be in existence, and the status of the other 2 halves are unknown, he may remove only 4 se'ah, which is half of 8 se'ah, from the storeroom and eat them. The Rav tells us in the conclusion of his commentary, the halacha follows the opinion of these sages. That is then, Rabotai, today's Mishnah Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.